Hi, this is lesson 11 in the Fine Arts Music Lectures. This is the second of 5 lectures about rhythm. Last time we talked about rhythm in sort of a basic sense, what it is, what the beat is, that kind of thing. And today we're going to get into sort of the nitty-gritty of notes and how much they're worth and how to write them down and that kind of thing. So remember, you should be writing all of this information down in your notebook so that you can use it in class and to study with when you're not sitting in front of a computer or a cell phone. Okay, so on the agenda, we're going to talk about notes. We're going to talk about notes which are sound. We're going to talk about sounds. So we're going to talk about whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, and 16th notes. Let's get started. Before we get there, just have to do a quick review. Remember that the beat is the steady pulse in music. When you're listening to a piece of music and you're tapping your foot along to the music, that is the beat. It's that steady pulse that's always going. That steady thing. Feels good. It makes it easy to dance to. So there are some notes that last, notes of course last all different amounts of time. Some last for a whole bunch of beats. Maybe a whole bunch of beats will go by while the note sounds the whole time. Some notes maybe are just one beat, so just a note for every beat kind of thing. And sometimes composers, musicians fit lots of notes into one beat. So we're going to talk about today how to write those things down and how they're written down. So let's get started. Whole notes are the first kind of note that we're going to talk about. It's the most sort of basic note in Western music. A whole note is worth 4 full beats. Doesn't matter what the tempo is, doesn't matter if it's fast or slow, it's always 4 beats. 4 beats go by and that note is held. You'll look down here, you'll notice that the whole note looks kind of like a 0, or maybe kind of more like a football shape a little bit, with a hole in the middle, kind of like a donut maybe. That's a whole note, so you know it's always 4 beats. That's sort of the most basic one to get started with. So the next note is a half note, as you might have guessed. The half note is worth 2 beats. It's worth half the value of a whole note, so it's worth 2 full beats. Again, doesn't matter if the tempo is fast or slow or medium or whatever, a half note is always 2 beats, always 2 beats. Notice that if you look down here, you can see that the half note looks almost identical to a whole note, except it has a stem. And a stem is that vertical line that's attached to the note head. So the little sort of donut part of the note is what we call the note head, and then the stem is the thing that comes off of that. It's that vertical line. And that stem can go either up, like this one is down here, for example, or they can also go down. So it doesn't matter. They just have to be vertical. So there you go. Next. There we have a little review there. 4 beats for a whole note, 2 beats for a half note. As you might have guessed, the next kind of note is a... Oh, and then there we go again. We're getting ahead of myself. We have 2 half notes that equal a whole note. So, of course, this kind of music is just sort of basic mathematics here, because half notes are worth 2 and a whole note's worth 4. It's 2 plus 2 equals 4. So, and now, for our next note, as you might have guessed, the quarter note. So the quarter note is 1 full beat. So 1 beat per note is quarter notes. Again, it doesn't matter what the tempo is, if it's fast, it's slow, it's medium, it's whatever. A quarter note is always worth 1 beat. Notice that it looks a lot like a half note, but the biggest difference is that, or the only difference really, is that the note head is colored in on a quarter note. So we have a sort of black note head, and again it has a stem. This stem is going up the vertical line, or it could be going down. It doesn't matter which way the stem goes for now. So 4 beats for a whole note, 2 beats for a half note, 1 beat for a quarter note. And you can probably guess what the next one is. An eighth note. An eighth note is worth 1/2 of a beat. It's always worth a half of a beat. Notice that it looks almost identical to a quarter note. The only difference is that an eighth note has a flag. It's that little sort of curvy line that we have attached to the end of the stem, and that indicates that it's worth a half a beat instead of a whole beat. So that means that it's an eighth note, not a quarter note. So that flag is a good word to know. That's a good thing. The other way that we can notate eighth notes is with beams, and it means the same thing. It's just kind of two different ways to look at the same idea. If you look down there, you'll see that we have two eighth notes that have flags, and then you'll have two that have beams. It's the same thing. It's like Robert and Bob. It's basically the same thing. So two different ways to look at the same idea. And then right down there you can see there's an example of the stems, and these are, in this case, are beamed eighth notes. These are beamed eighth notes down here. You'll see that they go up and down. Doesn't matter. The stems can go up or down. Doesn't matter. It means the same thing. So, and even if eighth notes are beamed together, they're always worth the same amount. They're always a half of a beat, no matter what. So our tally so far is 4 beats for a whole note, 2 beats for a half note, 1 beat for a quarter note, and a half a beat for an eighth note. And our last note of this lecture is a 16th note. So a 16th note is worth a quarter of a beat, as you might have guessed. Notice that it looks the same as an eighth note, except it has an extra flag, so that makes a total of 2 flags on a 16th note. It'll always have those 2 flags, so that's how you know it's a 16th note and not an eighth note. Just like with eighth notes, we can use a beam to sort of group 16th notes together. They usually come in groups of 4, or often at least come in groups of 4. And then if you look down there again, it's an example of the same thing written 2 ways. 4 16th notes written with flags, and then 4 16th notes written with beams. It's the same thing. It would sound the exact same if it were played by a musician. And then down here again you can see 4 16th notes that are beamed together with the stems up, and 4 16th notes that are beamed together with the stems down. So again, would sound like the same thing, just different ways to sort of look at it visually. So there's our sort of total for today. We have whole notes that are worth 4 beats, half notes that are worth 2 beats, quarter notes that are worth 1 beat, eighth notes that are worth a half a beat, and 16th notes that are worth a quarter of a beat. So in here is another example of sort of the flags versus beams thing. Notice that there's big equal signs. That means those eighth notes written on the top there, there are 4 eighth notes that are written with flags. They would sound the just exact same as the ones that are beamed together. Same thing with those 16th notes that are written. The 4 16th notes that have flags on them would sound the exact same as the ones that are beamed together. And then here is a note tree. So just to sort of show how many notes can fit within 4 beats, we have 1 whole note, which is the same thing as 2 half notes, the same thing as 4 quarter notes, the same thing as 8 eighth notes, the same thing as 16 16th notes. Another reason that I like this diagram in particular is because it shows that the stems, remember those vertical lines that come off the note head, they can go either up or down. So it just doesn't really change a whole lot except for how it looks. It would sound the same. So for our purposes now, it doesn't matter. So there you go. Just to wrap up what we did today, talked about notes, talked about whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, and 16th notes, how much they're worth, what they look like, and we talked about beams, flags, and stems. So that is the end of part 2, and stay tuned for rhythm part 3. Here we go.